The city never truly slept, but it had its rhythms, its sighs between bursts of noise. At 3 in the morning, the street stretched long and half-empty, lit by sickly amber lamps and neon signs that buzzed with a kind of lonely persistence. Marcus Hayes guided his yellow taxi through those stretches like a man tracing familiar scars. He had been driving these routes for nearly a decade, every night carving the same patterns through the heart of a city that only respected speed, strength, and money. To most who saw him, Marcus was just another black man behind the wheel, weathered face lit faintly by the glow of the dashboard. His shoulders filled the driver's seat, his posture straight but relaxed. People rarely looked beyond the uniform of the taxi, the cabbie's cap, the ever-polite, "Where to?" that floated through the plexiglass divider. They never guessed what had come before, what he had given up. That secret lay dormant in him like a coiled spring, hidden under layers of patience. Tonight was long even by Marcus's standards. The rain had been steady since midnight, mist rising from the asphalt like a ghost clinging to the ground. He had picked up drunks spilling out of bars, silent workers finishing late shifts, and a young couple who argued in whispers until one began to cry. Each passenger left behind fragments of themselves, perfume, sweat, cigarette smoke. Marcus had learned to breathe through it all. As he rolled past the gas station on Elmwood and 7th, Marcus noticed them. 4 young men leaning against a black sedan, smoking, laughing too loudly. Their sneakers were spotless, their jackets brand new, and there was a hunger in their eyes that had nothing to do with laughter. One of them, tall and wiry, made a mock salute toward Marcus's cab as he idled at the red light. Another spat deliberately on the road, just where Marcus's tires would pass. He let the light change and drove on. He had seen men like this before. Once upon a time, he had been trained to read them faster than they could blink. His shift carried him downtown, where the skyscrapers rose like dark teeth against the clouds. A drunk businessman waved him down, slurring an address across town. Marcus drove him in silence, taking side streets to avoid the flashing blue lights of a police blockade. When the man stumbled out, leaving a crumpled bill on the seat, Marcus sighed and stretched his shoulders. His body ached more these days. Age had crept into his joints quietly, though his mind remained sharp, disciplined. By 4, the rain had lightened, leaving the road slick with reflections. Marcus pulled into a diner parking lot, one of those 24-hour places where coffee tasted like tar but was hot enough to keep a man awake. He sat in the cab for a moment, engine humming, radio murmuring old blues from a distant station. The song made him think of his father, a railroad man who had taught him that dignity didn't come from what people thought of you, but how you carried yourself. Marcus carried himself like a man who had once stood within 10 feet of presidents, even if no one in this city would ever know. He was about to step inside for coffee when headlights swept across his mirror. The same black sedan from Elmwood pulled into the lot. The laughter spilled out before the doors even opened. 4 silhouettes climbed out, voices sharp against the night. They didn't head into the diner. They leaned against the hood, smoking again, glancing toward his cab with smirks that were anything but friendly. Marcus closed his door quietly and restarted the engine. Coffee could wait. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't foolish either. Predators searched for weakness, sometimes leaving was the wiser fight. He eased out of the lot and back onto the road. In the mirror, the sedan idled, then pulled out behind him. Their headlights flickered twice, as though signaling. Marcus felt the old instinct stir again. His senses sharpened, his mind slipping into a kind of focus that most men only knew in moments of survival. To them, he was just a cabbie they could hassle for fun. They had no idea that the man in the driver's seat had once been trained to anticipate ambushes, to survive under fire, to keep breathing when others froze. The sedan followed him for 6 blocks. Marcus slowed at intersections, changed lanes twice, and finally turned abruptly onto a one-way street. The sedan mirrored every move. He recognized the tactic: they wanted him to know they were there. To feel cornered. He gripped the wheel tighter, not from fear, but from memory. Faces from the past flickered across his mind, dignitaries who had trusted him with their lives, agents he had trained beside, missions where silence had been the difference between life and death. He had walked away from that world, but it had never really walked away from him. At the end of the block, Marcus spotted a late-night hotel where taxis often idled for fares. He slowed, pretending to pull over. The sedan crept closer, music thumping from inside. As Marcus stopped, the car slid up alongside him, windows lowering. A face leaned out, thin, pale, with a grin that didn't touch the eyes. "Hey, old man," the youth called. "Nice cab. Bet it runs like crap." Laughter erupted from the others. Another leaned out the back, flicking ashes onto the wet street. "Why don't you give us a ride for free, huh? Or maybe give us the car?" Marcus didn't answer. He stared straight ahead, waiting for the light. His silence seemed to irritate them. One pounded on the side of the cab, making the whole frame shudder. The others whooped, delighted. By their own bravado. Marcus could feel the diner's coffee cooling miles behind him, the city pressing forward into another gray dawn. He exhaled slowly, a controlled release of air that masked the storm rising in his chest. The light turned green. Marcus accelerated, smooth and steady, leaving their laughter behind. But he knew it wasn't over. He could feel the night stretching out before him like a battlefield, and the players had already been chosen. They thought they were hunters circling prey. They hadn't yet learned that some prey carry teeth sharper than wolves. The city was beginning to stir from its slumber. Street sweepers hummed along the curbs, and bakery ovens glowed faintly through fogged glass storefronts. Marcus Hayes's cab rolled down Southridge Avenue, wipers squeaking across the windshield. He had thought the gang might grow bored and peel off, leaving him to finish his shift in peace. But the black sedan remained a phantom in his mirror, never too close, never far enough to disappear. Marcus had seen shadows like this in other places, in other lives. Once, in Prague, he had spotted the glint of a sniper scope long before the shot was fired. In New York, he had watched a man's nervous hands twitch on a briefcase and known it carried more than papers. Tonight, the same instinct told him, these kids weren't just joyriding. They were looking for someone to test, someone to humiliate, someone they thought wouldn't fight back. At a red light near the riverfront, Marcus slowed to a stop. The sedan crept up beside him, music thundering from its speakers, bass rattling the cab's windows. A passenger leaned out, short dreadlocks, cocky grin. "Yo, taxi man," he shouted over the beat. "Bet you don't make nothing out here this late. Why don't you hand us your wallet, huh? Save us the trouble later." Marcus kept his eyes forward. Silence was a tactic. He had learned it years ago: the less you respond, the less control you give away. His calmness only seemed to fuel their bravado. Another voice chimed in from the back seat. "You hear me, old man? We talking to you." The words were punctuated by a fist slamming against the side of his cab. The whole vehicle shook. The light turned green. Marcus eased forward, but the sedan swerved sharply, blocking his lane. Tires squealed as they came to a halt in the middle of the intersection. Horns blared behind them, but the young men only laughed, stepping out of their car like actors taking the stage. Marcus sat still, hands firm on the wheel. 4 of them now, circling. One banged on the trunk. Another tapped a knife against his palm, more for show than menace, at least for now. "Come on, man," the tall one jeered. "Step out. We just want to talk. Ain't you tired of driving people around all night like some servant?" Marcus slowly lowered his window. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "Go home, boys. It's too early in the morning for this nonsense. The mockery that followed was immediate, their laughter bouncing off the empty buildings. Did you hear him? Old man thinks he's our dad. Nah, he thinks he's tough. One crouched near his headlight, pretending to carve his initials with the knife's point. The sound of steel against glassy paint was deliberate, taunting. Marcus could feel his pulse steady, not racing. He had been in far worse corners, surrounded by men far more dangerous than these. But patience had its limits, and the street was watching now. A pair of delivery workers across the block paused, uncertain whether to intervene or disappear. "Come on, get out," one shouted again, yanking Marcus's door handle. It was locked, of course. The man sneered, rattling it harder. "You scared, huh? Taxi boy too scared?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. They saw fear where there was only calculation. He knew precisely how fast he could move if he chose to. He knew where each one stood, what weapon they carried, and how their weight shifted with overconfidence. But tonight wasn't yet the night to unleash that side of himself. Tonight, he was still just Marcus the taxi driver. He turned his wheel sharply, engine growling. The cab jerked forward, forcing two of them to stumble back. The sedan screeched as he slipped around it, tires spitting water. Horns blared again as Marcus threaded through the traffic, leaving the gang scrambling back into their car. For several blocks, the cab surged through the half-empty streets, rain spraying up from its wheels. But the mirror showed what Marcus already knew: the black sedan was back, lights glaring, closing the distance. They were exhilarated now. Harassment had turned into a game, and the chase had only just begun. He pulled down Maple Street, a narrower road lined with shuttered shops. The sedan swung behind him, swerving recklessly. One of the youths leaned out the window, shouting insults Marcus had heard too many times in his life. The words were meant to belittle, to strip away dignity. But Marcus had long ago learned that dignity was something no man could take, only something you could surrender. He gripped the wheel, jaw set, and refused to give them that victory. Near the end of Maple, a stop sign forced him to slow. The sedan fishtailed to block his way again. This time, all four doors flew open at once. They spilled out onto the street, their laughter louder than the rain. Passers-by shrank back into doorways. Windows lit briefly, then dimmed again. Nobody wanted trouble. The leader, broad-shouldered, with a scar along his jaw, pointed the knife straight at Marcus. "You think you can just drive off? Nah, you stuck with us tonight. Time you learn some respect." Respect. The word cut deeper than the threat. Marcus had spent a lifetime guarding the most powerful people in the world, standing invisible in the background, absorbing dangers meant for others. He had known respect from presidents and disdain from men who thought his skin defined him. These boys didn't understand the weight of the word they toyed with. He rolled down the window again, just enough for his voice to carry. "Last warning. Go home. Don't push further." The scarred one laughed. "Or what, old man? You gonna write us a ticket?" He slapped the knife against the cab's roof, metal ringing in the night. His friends hooped, emboldened. Marcus's eyes flickered briefly, calculating the angle of the knife, the distance of each body, the line of retreat if he needed it. His breathing was even, steady. On the surface, he was the same calm taxi driver. Beneath, the old Marcus stirred, the one who had been trained never to bluff, never to waste words. They had no idea the storm they were waking. The laughter rose, echoing down the empty street. But in Marcus's silence, something shifted. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting. This was no longer just harassment. It was the beginning of something else, something they would regret. The rain had thinned to a cold drizzle, smearing the neon reflections on the asphalt into streaks of color. Marcus Hayes sat in the driver's seat of his cab, the engine idling low, the steering wheel steady beneath his hands. Around him, the gang prowled like wolves circling prey. Four pairs of eyes, lit by arrogance, leaned on their numbers and youth. But Marcus had been stalked before, in alleys darker than this, by men armed with more than bravado and knives. One of the boys kicked the rear bumper, laughing when the metal groaned. "What's the matter, old man? Don't you got anything to say? Afraid we'll break your teeth if you open your mouth." His friends roared with approval, their voices bouncing off the shuttered storefronts. Marcus inhaled deeply through his nose, slow and even. Patience, he reminded himself. The lesson had been drilled into him years ago by men whose eyes had seen battlefields, not playgrounds. The first weapon you use is not your fists, not your gun, but your control. Without that, you lost before the fight even began. He turned his head, locking eyes with the boy closest to the driver's side window. The youth froze, just for a second, as though caught by something he didn't expect. Marcus's gaze was calm, unblinking, too calm, too steady. It carried a weight that didn't belong on the face of a taxi driver. Then the boy smirked again, shaking it off. "What you staring at? You want me to cut that look off your face?" The knife clinked against the glass, scratching faint lines into it. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he reached slowly to adjust his rearview mirror, as if the threat didn't exist. The gesture was deliberate, quiet defiance, the kind that unnerved more than shouting ever could. Patience. He had survived ambushes by waiting longer than his enemies could stand. He had outlasted interrogations by breathing evenly when others panicked. Tonight, his patience was a shield. But even shields had limits. The leader, the one with the scar along his jaw, leaned closer. "You think you're tough because you don't talk, huh? You're just some washed-up cabbie. Nobody cares about you." He spat on the hood, saliva sliding down in the rain. Nobody. The word hit Marcus differently than they intended. Nobody. It had been years since he had worn the black suit, the coiled earpiece hidden under his collar, the lapel pin that marked him as one of the most trusted men in America. Back then, he had been a shadow at the edge of history, always watching, always ready. He had stood in rooms where the world shifted with a signature, a handshake, a bullet narrowly missed. And yet here he was, dismissed as nobody by boys who didn't know what true danger looked like. His jaw tightened, just a fraction. The restraint was beginning to ache. He could almost feel the old self rising under his skin, the self he had buried beneath years of quiet driving and polite nods. Another boy, younger than the rest, emboldened by the leader's words, stepped forward and slapped the side mirror until it snapped backward. "Oops," he said with a mocking grin. "Guess you don't need that." Marcus's hand twitched on the steering wheel. For a heartbeat, he saw himself moving, door flying open, his elbow striking, wrist twisting the knife free, bodies hitting the ground. The moves played out in his mind like muscle memory, smooth and efficient. But then he exhaled, forcing the vision back into the cage where he had kept it for so long. Not yet. His patience was tested again when the scarred leader leaned his entire weight against the hood, tapping the knife rhythmically. "Come on, man. Just step out. Show us if you got any fight left. Or you gonna sit there all night hiding behind that wheel?" The words were meant to break him, but they only reminded Marcus of something an old instructor had once said: the loudest man in the room is the weakest. The one who waits, he's the one to fear. Marcus cracked the window just enough for his voice to slip through. "You don't want this fight." His tone was calm, almost conversational, but it cut through their laughter like a blade. It wasn't a threat. It was a certainty. The boys blinked at each other. Then laughter erupted again, louder, harsher, tinged with the edge of something they couldn't quite name. "Hear him. Taxi boy thinks he's John Wick or something," one shouted. They didn't realize it wasn't a bluff. The youngest of them, the one who had broken the mirror, leaned closer, trying to prove himself. "You ain't nothing," he hissed, his breath fogging the glass. "You don't even got the guts to." Marcus's hand shot up. Not to strike, not to lash out, but to press the horn. The blast shattered the quiet street, echoing off the walls like a gunshot. The boy stumbled back, startled, and for a moment the illusion of control broke. The leader snarled, face twisting. Enough of this. Get him out of the car. 3 sets of hands grabbed at the doors, tugging, yanking. But the locks held, the cab a fortress. Inside, Marcus sat perfectly still, pulse steady, eyes focused. His restraint was wearing thin, but it wasn't gone yet. He had one rule left, one more layer of patience before he let go of the part of himself he had tried to bury. He wouldn't break it unless they crossed the line. Unless they made him. The scarred leader banged the knife against the windshield, sparks spitting where metal scraped glass. His voice rose into a roar. You hear me, old man? You're nothing. Nothing. Marcus stared through the glass, his reflection mingling with the scarred boy's. For the first time that night, his lips curved in the faintest of smiles. It wasn't humor, it was inevitability. Because he knew something they didn't. Patience wasn't weakness. Patience was the pause before the storm. And the storm was coming. The cab's tires hissed on wet pavement as Marcus turned off Southridge Avenue and into a narrower street, its lamps flickering weakly against the drizzle. He hadn't chosen the alley by mistake. Years of experience had taught him that sometimes you needed space, not to hide, but to end things cleanly. The sedan roared after him, its headlights splashing long shadows across the brick walls. Horns and laughter followed, manic and reckless. The gang wasn't tired of their game yet. They were building towards something bigger, something uglier. Marcus could feel it in their shouts, in the gleam of the knife when it caught the light. The alley narrowed further, hemmed in by dumpsters and chain-link fences. Marcus slowed, easing the cab to a crawl, letting the predators believe they had cornered their prey. His hands gripped the wheel, calm but tight, every muscle coiled in readiness. The sedan screeched sideways, blocking the exit. Doors flew open. 4 young men spilled out into the alley, the smell of smoke and cheap liquor drifting with them. Their voices echoed harshly in the confined space. End of the line, old man, the scarred leader shouted, slamming the knife against his palm. You thought you could just drive away? Nah. We own this street tonight. The others circled the cab. One kicked a dumpster, sending a crash reverberating down the block. Another smacked the rear window with an open hand, daring Marcus to react. The youngest crouched by the rear tire, pretending to slash at it with his blade. Their laughter was wild, infectious, a pack feeding on its own bravado. Inside, Marcus sat motionless. To them, it looked like fear. In truth, it was calculation. He measured distances, counted their steps, gauged their breathing. He knew which one would lunge first, which one's weight leaned too far forward, which one held the knife too loose. His mind worked with the precision of a man who had rehearsed survival 1,000 times in silence. The leader stepped closer, blade glinting. Get out. Now. We'll let you crawl home if you beg nice enough. He grinned, flashing his teeth in the rain. But if you keep hiding, we're gonna carve our names into this cab, and maybe your skin. That was the line. Marcus exhaled, slow and steady, as if releasing years of restraint with the mist from his lungs. His fingers moved, unlocking the doors with a click that echoed too loud in the alley. The gang froze for half a second, surprised. Then excitement flared in their eyes. They thought they had won. The driver's side door opened, not fast, not frantic, but deliberate. Marcus stepped out, unfolding his tall frame into the rain. His jacket clung to broad shoulders, his stance balanced and grounded. The light caught the lines of his face, carved by time and silence, eyes sharp and steady. The scarred leader barked a laugh. Finally grew a spine, huh? You think you scare us, old man? You're outnumbered 4 to 1. Marcus's voice was low, even. Walk away. The youngest cackled, swinging his knife casually. Or what? You gonna call the cops? They don't care about you. Walk away, Marcus repeated, his tone unchanged, his gaze fixed. The gang hesitated, not because they believed him, but because something in his posture unsettled them. He wasn't hunched or trembling. He wasn't pleading. He was, waiting. The scarred leader snarled, breaking the silence. Cut him. The youngest lunged forward, blade flashing toward Marcus's midsection. But the move was sloppy, born of adrenaline, not skill. Marcus shifted. One step to the side, one hand snapping down. In less than a heartbeat, the knife was wrenched free, the boy's wrist twisted, his own momentum throwing him against the cab with a thud. The blade clattered to the ground. The alley went silent except for the patter of rain. The others stared, momentarily stunned. The move had been too fast, too fluid, too practiced. The scarred leader's smirk faltered. Get him, he roared. Two rushed at once. Marcus pivoted, catching the first by the jacket and using his momentum to hurl him into the second. They crashed into a dumpster, curses spilling into the night. The clang of metal echoed like gunfire. The last one swung wildly, fists flailing. Marcus ducked, his elbow snapping upward with controlled force. It connected with the boy's chin, sending him stumbling back, eyes dazed. And then it was over. In less than 10 seconds, the gang that had circled him so boldly was on the ground, groaning, cursing, too shocked to rise. Marcus stood in the center of the alley, breathing evenly, rain streaking down his face. He hadn't broken a sweat. The scarred leader scrambled to his feet, knife still clutched, fury twisting his features. But his eyes betrayed something else now, fear. Who the hell are you? He spat, voice trembling. Marcus bent, picked up the fallen blade, and flipped it expertly in his hand before tossing it into the gutter with a clatter. His gaze pinned the leader like a hawk's. You don't want to know. The leader took a step back, the bravado leaking from him. His friend staggered upright, rubbing bruises, staring at Marcus with wide, uncertain eyes. The laughter was gone. The game was over. Marcus turned, walking back to his cab with unhurried steps. He slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and locked it with a final click. His hands gripped the wheel again, steady, calm. To anyone passing by, he was just another taxi driver preparing to leave an alley. But those boys had glimpsed something different, something dangerous. The engine rumbled to life. The cab rolled forward, the sedan scraping out of the way. Marcus didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew they wouldn't follow him now. For the first time in years, the mask had slipped. His patience had snapped, and in its place, the man he once was had emerged, the man trained to neutralize threats before they drew breath. The man who had walked beside presidents in silence, always unseen, always ready. As the city swallowed him back into its streets, Marcus exhaled again. He didn't like unleashing that part of himself. But some nights, the past refused to stay buried. And tonight, the storm had finally broken. Dawn crept slowly across the city, washing the streets in pale gray light. Marcus Hayes drove through the thinning rain, his wipers squeaking at intervals, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. To anyone else, he looked like nothing more than a tired cabbie finishing another long night. But behind the calm exterior, his mind churned with old memories, fragments of a life he had worked hard to bury. The gang's laughter still echoed faintly in his ears, though now it carried no threat, only the ghost of foolishness. They had seen enough of him to back away, but Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before someone else, someone more dangerous, tested him again. Because no matter how deep you bury a past, it has a way of clawing back to the surface. He pulled the cab into a small diner parking lot, the same one he had passed earlier, and shut off the engine. Inside, the place smelled of coffee and grease, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes. A few night shift workers hunched over their plates, and an old jukebox hummed a tune no one was listening to. Marcus slid into a booth by the window, his back instinctively against the wall. The waitress, a tired woman with kind eyes, poured him coffee without asking. "Long night?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Long enough." She smiled faintly and walked off. Marcus wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into his palms. For a few minutes, he simply watched the rain trickle down the window, the steam rising from his cup. He looked like a man resting. Inside, though, the shadows of his past began to stir, demanding to be acknowledged. Washington, D.C., 1997. A ballroom filled with foreign dignitaries. Marcus, younger then, sharp in his black suit, stood near the edge of the crowd, an earpiece coiled discreetly under his collar. His eyes never stopped moving. He noted the way one waiter lingered near the buffet too long, the unnatural bulge under a guest's tuxedo jacket, the slight hesitation in a woman's laugh as she touched her clutch. A voice crackled in his ear, "Hayes, East Entrance. Unknown approaching." He moved without hesitation, weaving through the crowd like smoke. Outside, under the glow of chandeliers spilling light through glass doors, a man in a rumpled suit stood arguing with security. Marcus's hand hovered near his shoulder holster. The man reached inside his coat. In less than a second, Marcus had him pinned against the wall, weapon confiscated, wrists cuffed. The crowd inside never even noticed. That was the job. Protect, anticipate, neutralize. And disappear again, invisible in the corner. Back in the diner, Marcus sipped his coffee, swallowing down the memory. He had left that life for a reason. The job had taken pieces of him, little by little, until there was almost nothing left to give. But the discipline never left, nor the instincts. Those remained etched into his bones. The bell above the diner door jingled, pulling him back. A young man entered, eyes bleary from lack of sleep, backpack slung over one shoulder. He ordered to-go coffee, then glanced at Marcus. For a moment, Marcus saw the same bravado as the gang from last night, but then he realized, no. This one was different. Nervous. Running from something unseen. It reminded him of another fragment. Dallas, 2003. The president's motorcade idled in a private hangar. Marcus stood beside the sleek limousine, eyes scanning the shadows. A staffer approached, clipboard in hand, but Marcus caught the tremor in his step, the unnatural bulge under his jacket. A quick signal, and 3 agents intercepted. The man had a bomb vest wired beneath his clothes. Marcus never forgot the look in his eyes, half fury, half despair. Later that night, as the city celebrated narrowly averted disaster, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, staring at his reflection. He realized then that the job wasn't just about catching threats. It was about carrying their faces forever. He pushed the memory aside. His cabbie life had been a choice. A quieter life, far removed from the constant hum of danger. But even in the stillness, danger found him. The waitress returned. "You want breakfast?" "Just coffee," Marcus said. His voice carried the same weight it always had, calm, firm, final. As she walked away, Marcus noticed a newspaper left on the counter. The headline screamed about corruption in city politics. A photograph caught his eye, a councilman shaking hands with a man Marcus recognized instantly. His stomach tightened. The man was no local businessman. Years ago, Marcus had seen him in a file, international arms trafficker, flagged as a potential threat to national security. The shadows of his past reached out again, curling into the present. The gang from last night had been nothing more than noise, but this was something else. A reminder that the world he had left still moved beneath the surface of ordinary life. Marcus drained his coffee and rose. He paid in cash, left a tip, and stepped back into the cool morning air. His cab waited faithfully, streaked with rain, its engine humming when he turned the key. The city was waking, unaware of how close danger always lurked. As he pulled into traffic, Marcus's mind replayed the alley, the gang's laughter, the knife clattering against wet concrete. His patience had snapped, and in that moment his past had bled through. He had moved too precisely, too efficiently, for anyone to mistake him for just a taxi driver. Those kids might dismiss it as luck, or age-honed toughness. But Marcus knew better. The past never truly let go. New York, 2010. The last mission. A foreign ambassador, targeted in a hotel suite. Marcus had stood guard by the door, hand on his earpiece, when the gunfire came. Chaos erupted. He had neutralized 2 men, shielded the ambassador, and dragged him through a back stairwell to safety. But in that stairwell, he had seen something in himself he didn't like anymore, a cold, ruthless efficiency that scared him more than the bullets. That night, he turned in his badge, his weapon, and his resignation. He traded the suit for a cabbie's uniform. He thought the city streets, with their drunks and tired workers, would be simpler, safer. And for a while, they were. But driving through the dawn now, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had other plans. Maybe last night's gang was just a warning. Maybe the shadows weren't finished with him yet. He tightened his grip on the wheel. His reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, older, wearier, but still sharp, still dangerous. Marcus Hayes, former Secret Service agent. Taxi driver. Ghost of a man who had once stood between presidents and bullets. And though the world thought him invisible, forgotten, he knew one truth: shadows always find their way back. By nightfall, the city had slipped into its second skin. The daylight rush had faded into neon and shadows, and Marcus Hayes was once again behind the wheel of his cab, navigating the maze of streets with steady patience. He hadn't expected to see the black sedan again. He had given the boys their chance to walk away, to reconsider. But men driven by bravado rarely retreat quietly. And sure enough, just past midnight, the mirror revealed familiar headlights stalking him from 2 cars back. The same low thrum of bass, the same cocky laughter drifting through rolled-down windows. They hadn't learned. Or maybe they were too stubborn to. Either way, Marcus knew this night wouldn't end without blood or bruises. He guided the cab into quieter streets, toward the industrial district where warehouses loomed silent and empty. The boys thought they were hunting him. They didn't realize he was choosing the battlefield. At a deserted intersection, the sedan surged forward, cutting him off. Brakes screeched. The cab slid to a halt. Doors burst open and the gang spilled out again, swagger louder this time, fueled by the confidence of numbers. The scarred leader twirled his knife, eyes gleaming in the streetlight. "Well, look who's out for another joyride," he sneered. "Thought you could humiliate us and get away? Nah. Tonight, old man, you pay." The others fanned out, one slamming a fist against the hood, another circling toward the rear. Their voices filled the empty street like a chorus of jackals. Inside, Marcus inhaled deeply, letting the rhythm of his breath center him. His patience was gone, stripped by their persistence. But what replaced it wasn't anger. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, unshakable. The part of him he had tried to bury for years rose now, inevitable and unrelenting. The locks clicked open. The driver's door swung wide. Marcus stepped out. He didn't posture. He didn't raise his fists. He simply straightened his frame, broad shoulders set, eyes locked on the leader. The air seemed to shift, heavy with something the boys couldn't name but instinctively felt. The scarred one grinned too wide, trying to mask the flicker of unease. "You think standing tall's gonna save you? We'll cut you down to size." Marcus spoke only once. "Walk away." It was the last kindness he would offer. The youngest laughed and lunged, knife flashing. But Marcus moved before the blade could fall. His hand snapped forward, catching the boy's wrist mid-swing. A twist, a pivot, bones cracked, the knife clattered to the pavement, and the boy was on his knees, howling. Gasps from the others. For a heartbeat, they froze. Then rage drowned fear. Two rushed at him together. Marcus stepped aside, letting their momentum carry them past. His elbow struck one square in the ribs, folding him instantly. His hand shot to the other's collar, yanking him forward and slamming him against the hood with a thud that shook the metal. The scarred leader roared, charging with wild swings. Marcus didn't retreat. He sidestepped, parried the knife with a bare hand, then drove his palm into the leader's chin with bone-rattling force. The knife spun into the gutter. The leader staggered back, blood on his lip, eyes wide in disbelief. The last unhurt boy tried to tackle Marcus from behind. A mistake. Marcus dropped his weight, shifted, and sent the kid sprawling across the pavement with a simple throw, his body skidding into a trash bin. The silence afterward was deafening. For boys groaning on the ground, the leader clutching his jaw, the others dazed and broken. Marcus stood among them, not panting, not sweating, his posture still calm, still composed. Every move had been precise, efficient. No wasted motion. No flourish. Only results. The leader spat blood, fury, and fear mingling in his voice. What the hell are you?" Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then he bent, picked up the fallen knife, and held it lightly between two fingers. "I'm someone you should have left alone." He tossed the blade far down the street, where it clattered into the darkness. The gang looked at him differently now. The bravado was gone, stripped away. In its place was something Marcus recognized well, recognition of power, of danger. They didn't know his history. They didn't know the presidents he had shielded, the bullets he had diverted, the assassins he had stopped before they drew breath. But they knew, instinctively, that the man standing before them was no ordinary cab driver. The scarred leader tried to rise, but Marcus stepped forward, his shadow falling long across the boy. His voice dropped, low and measured. "This is the last time. You follow me again, and I won't be so gentle." The leader's bravado cracked. He nodded, barely audible. His friends pulled him back, whispering frantic words, urging him toward the car. One by one, limping and muttering, they retreated into the sedan. The engine coughed, headlights swung wide, and the car peeled away into the night, leaving Marcus alone in the silence. He stood for a moment, the drizzle cooling against his skin, the echoes of combat still humming in his bones. His patience had ended, and in its place, the Secret Service agent had risen again. Not the badge or the suit or the duty. Just the man, the training, the instinct, the shadow that never truly left him. He slid back into the cab, shut the door, and locked it. His reflection in the rearview stared back at him, older now, eyes lined with fatigue, but still sharp, still dangerous. For years, he had convinced himself he could disappear, blend into the noise of the city, drive unnoticed. Tonight reminded him that he couldn't outrun what he was. As the cab rolled back onto the main road, Marcus thought of the young men he had left behind. Perhaps they would learn. Perhaps not. But one thing was certain, they would never forget the night they tangled with a man whose silence was deadlier than their noise. Marcus turned onto a broader street. The city stretching before him, lights glittering like distant stars. He had wanted peace. He had chosen patience. But when patience ran dry, he still carried a counterstrike as silent and unstoppable as the dawn. The city was awake now, its streets humming with the beginnings of another day. Morning light spilled between the towers, gleaming on wet pavement and catching in the puddles left by the night's rain. Marcus Hayes drove his cab down Main Street, the rumble of the engine steady, his hands resting loosely on the wheel. Outwardly, he looked no different from the dozens of other drivers navigating their routes. But inside, the silence of the night before still echoed, the groans of the boys sprawled on the pavement, the knife spinning into darkness, the way fear had finally replaced their laughter. He had thought it was over. Yet as he turned a corner near Jefferson Square, Marcus noticed flashing lights. Police cruisers boxed in a familiar black sedan, officers clustered around it, questioning the bruised and shaken youths inside. He slowed instinctively, gaze narrowing. They hadn't stayed quiet. Perhaps they thought the law would finish what they couldn't. Sure enough, one of the boys spotted his cab and pointed, shouting. Several officers turned, their expressions tightening. Marcus's jaw clenched. He could drive away, pretend none of this was his business. But he had never been a man to run from confrontation, not when the truth hung in the balance. He pulled to the curb, shut off the engine, and stepped into the cool morning air. The police moved toward him quickly, one hand already resting on a holstered weapon. "Sir, step over here," the officer commanded. Marcus complied, calm, steady. The scarred leader sneered from behind the cruiser, his lips still swollen. "That's him. That's the psycho cabbie who jumped us. Look at us, he's dangerous." The officer frowned, eyes scanning Marcus's quiet posture, his controlled breathing. "Sir, they're saying you assaulted them. Care to explain?" Marcus met his gaze, voice even. "They blocked my cab. They threatened me with knives. They forced me into an alley. I defended myself. Nothing more." The boys erupted in protest, shouting over one another, painting him as the aggressor. Their words tangled in chaos until one officer raised a hand. "Enough. We'll sort this out at the precinct if we have to." Marcus sighed. He had avoided this for years, avoided the necessity of revealing who he had once been. But this morning, in the middle of Jefferson Square, with half the city watching from sidewalks and shop windows, his restraint could no longer protect him. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Several officers stiffened, hands twitching toward their weapons. Marcus froze, then withdrew a thin, worn leather wallet. He flipped it open and held it out. The nearest officer took it, glancing skeptically at first. Then his eyes widened. Inside was an old but unmistakable badge, polished metal gleaming beneath scratched plastic. The seal of the United States Secret Service. The officer's expression shifted from suspicion to shock. "Sir, you were." Marcus nodded once. "I served 15 years. The square fell silent. Even the gang stopped shouting, their mouths gaping. The weight of the revelation hit them harder than his fists had. The calm taxi driver they had mocked and threatened wasn't just some aging man with stubborn dignity. He had once stood in the shadows of history, guarding leaders, anticipating threats, absorbing danger so others could breathe easy. Another officer took the wallet, verifying the credentials, his voice hushed. This is real." Marcus's gaze swept across the boys, lingering on the scarred leader. "You thought I was just a cabbie you could push around. You thought you'd find weakness in silence. But silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means you've already survived storms you can't imagine." The scarred boy's bravado cracked completely. He looked away, shame burning across his face. His friends shifted uneasily, their cockiness evaporated. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, I apologize. If I'd known." Marcus lifted a hand. "You couldn't have known. And it doesn't matter now. I left that life behind a long time ago. What matters is truth. They came at me. I defended myself. That's all." The officers exchanged looks. The gang muttered half-hearted protests, but their words rang hollow now. The weight of Marcus's past made them sound like children complaining after losing a game. The commanding officer finally stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, you're free to go. We'll handle them." He glanced at the boys, his expression sharp. "If they're smart, they'll think twice before crossing anyone again." Marcus took back his wallet, sliding it into his pocket. His voice was calm, but his words carried like steel. "Fear won't teach them. Respect might. But that's their choice to learn." He turned, walking back to his cab. The onlookers whispered, their eyes following him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The quiet man behind the wheel of a yellow taxi had just been revealed as someone far more formidable, someone who carried a history larger than the streets he now drove. Inside the cab, Marcus rested his hands on the wheel, letting the hum of the engine ground him. He didn't relish the revelation. He hadn't wanted to expose his past, not here, not like this. But perhaps it was necessary. Perhaps the city needed to be reminded that even the quietest among them could carry storms in their bones. As he pulled away from the flashing lights, Marcus felt the weight of eyes lingering on him. He wasn't invisible anymore. The gang would never forget. Neither would the officers, nor the bystanders who'd seen the badge. The secret was out, at least in part. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end. Once shadows escaped into the light, they didn't simply vanish. They stretched, they followed, they grew. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the city gold, Marcus Hayes drove on, a cabbie to the world, but now, undeniably, something more. The city gleamed under a sky just beginning to burn with morning. Golden light spilled across rooftops, down glass towers, and into the cracks of narrow alleys where the night's battles still lingered like ghosts. For most, it was just another day. For Marcus Hayes, it felt like the closing of a chapter he had long resisted writing. His cab rolled down the boulevard, steady as always. To strangers on the sidewalks, he was a man like any other, working the morning shift. They didn't see the weight pressed into his shoulders, the echoes of old missions that clung like shadows. They didn't know that just hours earlier, the myth of nobody had been shattered when his past was forced into daylight. Marcus stopped at a red light. The reflection in his windshield caught him off guard, his own face, framed by the rising sun. Older now, lined with years of patience and restraint, but behind the where still burned the same eyes that had once scanned rooftops for snipers, alleyways for assassins. He let out a slow breath, steady as ever. The world now knew pieces of his truth. The badge he had carried, the service he had given, the storms he had survived. But Marcus also knew the truth cut both ways. For every moment of respect earned, there were scars unseen, the sleepless nights replaying close calls, the faces of threats neutralized, the guilt of knowing his silence had often hidden sacrifices too deep to explain. He pulled the cab to the side of the road near Riverside Park. The air was crisp, clean from the night's rain. For once, he left the engine off and simply sat, listening to the river's low rush beyond the trees. The city behind him bustled impatiently, but here, time seemed to pause. His thoughts drifted to the boys, the gang that had mistaken his quiet for weakness. He wondered what lessons they had taken from their humiliation. Fear? Anger? Or perhaps something more valuable, the realization that respect was not demanded through noise but commanded through presence. He hoped they learned. But experience had taught him not to put too much faith in hope. Marcus remembered his old mentor in the service, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel. "You'll learn, Hayes," the man had said after their first mission. "The hardest part of this job isn't the bullets. It's the silence. The things you carry and never share. That silence, it'll weigh more than any weapon you ever lift." And the man had been right. For years Marcus had carried secrets heavier than steel. The plots he had stopped, the lives he had saved, the enemies who had disappeared into the margins of history. He had borne it all without applause, without explanation. Even now, as the truth crept into the daylight, he knew most people would never grasp the depth of what his silence contained. And perhaps that was for the best. The sun climbed higher, gilding the river with light. Marcus stepped out of the cab, stretching his shoulders, feeling the stiffness of age but also the steadiness of a body still strong. He walked toward the railing, resting his hands against cool metal, eyes fixed on the water. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to ask, what had it all been for? The years of service, the sacrifices, the solitude that followed? The answer came not in words, but in the quiet dignity of memory. He had protected lives. He had shielded leaders whose choices shaped nations. He had made sure history kept moving, even when danger lurked in the shadows. That was enough. He didn't need the world's applause. His legacy wasn't meant to be shouted. It was meant to be carried, silently, like a code written into his bones. Behind him, traffic honked faintly. Life pressed forward, impatient as always. Marcus turned, walked back to his cab, and slid inside. The seat embraced him with familiar wear. He turned the key, the engine humming like an old friend. The meter ticked. Another passenger flagged him down, a woman carrying groceries, her smile tired but grateful when he opened the door for her. Marcus nodded politely, listening to her destination. To her, he was just a driver helping her reach home. And that was exactly how he wanted it. As the cab merged back into the stream of cars, Marcus reflected one final time. He had revealed enough for the world to glimpse who he had been. But the full truth? That remained his alone. That was his code, the code of silence. Not silence born of fear or shame, but silence born of strength. The kind that protected, the kind that endured, the kind that let a man walk through storms without demanding the world notice his scars. The cab rolled on, blending into the city's rhythm. Marcus Hayes, the taxi driver, the shadow of a protector, the quiet storm. To the world, he was nobody special. But Marcus knew, and the few who had seen him in the alley, and the officers who had held his badge, knew too, that sometimes the strongest men are the ones who say the least. And with that, he drove into the rising sun, carrying his secrets not as a burden, but as a shield. His silence was his strength, his dignity, his legacy.